I came home without warning. After completing my final mission, I found my son dying alone in the intensive care unit. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law was out partying with her friends on a yacht off the coast of Miami, so I immediately froze all the accounts. An hour later, she lost her mind when she found out. I'm glad you're here. Stay until the end and tell me what city you're listening from. I want to know how far my story has reached. I stepped into Miami International Airport just as the sun began to rise, golden light streaming through the large glass windows of the terminal. My old military suitcase, worn at the corners, sat at my feet like a companion of more than 40 years. On my wrist, my father's pocket watch quivered with every movement, reminding me of the promise I made as a young woman: always come home. Now that promise weighed heavier than ever. At 61, newly retired after my last mission, I had devoted my entire life to the United States Marine Corps. From hostage rescues in Dallas to the endless days evacuating civilians after the devastating earthquake in California. But today, I just wanted to be a mother, to hold David, my son. After all those years, I pulled my suitcase from baggage claim with the same speed and precision I always carried. Outside, the early sun was already burning hot. I raised my hand for a taxi. Once inside, I told the driver, Palm Street, number 420, please. I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside my emotions surged like crashing waves. I imagined David opening the door with a bright smile, the two of us sitting at the table, catching up on everything I had missed. In just half an hour, I would see my son. The radio still played military news, reports I used to hear every day, but now they meant nothing. Yesterday, I had finished my final assignment as a strategic advisor for NATO in an anti-terrorism operation in South America. 40 years of service, from intercepting weapons smugglers on the Texas border to sleepless nights in the jungle, were now just distant memories. I stared silently out the window. The vast Atlantic shimmered, the waves sparkling as if to pull me back to those days. But my mind was fixed on David and the little house where I had placed so much hope. The taxi drove down the familiar coastal road, palm trees swaying just as when I had left. But when the car stopped in front of David's house, my heart clenched. The home was pitch black, curtains drawn tight, not a single light on. I hauled my luggage onto the porch, unease gnawing at me. I rang the bell, its chime echoing into silence, unanswered. I knocked hard on the door. Again. Still no response. The strange stillness was like an abandoned house. I walked down into the yard, scanning the place. The mailbox was stuffed with letters and crumpled flyers. They piled up along the walkway, as if no one had cleared them for weeks. My heart pounded, a heavy dread pressing on my chest. I had sent money regularly to David and my daughter-in-law, Emily, to take care of the family. I believed everything was fine, that my son was living in peace. But now, standing before this cold, lifeless house, I had no idea what had happened. Just then, I saw Margaret, David's neighbor, watering flowers across the street. She had lived there since I was young, always kind, always telling stories about the neighborhood children. I called out loudly, "Margaret!" She looked up, her eyes widening in shock. "Mary, good Lord, you're back. But you don't know, do you?" I rushed across the street, my legs trembling. "Know what? Where's David?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice from breaking. Margaret set down her watering can, her eyes filled with sorrow. "David's been in St. Mary's Hospital for 2 weeks. The ambulance came around midnight. I saw the logo clear as day." She paused, lowering her voice. "And Emily," my son said. He saw her social media post. She's been out, on a yacht off Miami, partying. I froze, as if the world had collapsed beneath me. David was in the hospital, 2 weeks now, and Emily, my daughter-in-law, the one I trusted to care for him, was out partying on a yacht. My blood felt like it stopped flowing, my heart stabbing with pain. "Do you know where Street Mary's is?" I asked hoarsely. Margaret nodded, giving me directions. I immediately ran into the street and hailed a taxi to the hospital. "As fast as you can," I nearly ordered the driver. Dozens of questions crowded my head. What had happened to my son that he needed an ambulance? And my daughter-in-law? How could she be out indulging herself while David lay so sick in the hospital? Sitting in the cab, my chest burned like fire. I clenched my father's pocket watch so tightly that my knuckles turned white. David, my son, the little boy who once chased me down the beach, who hugged me tight each time I came home from long missions, was now lying in a hospital bed. And me, the mother who had spent her life serving this country, hadn't even known he needed me. I blamed myself for all the years I thought sending money was enough to give him a good life. Now I only wanted to reach him, to see if he was alive, if he was okay. The taxi stopped at Street Mary's Hospital under the blazing noon Sunday. I paid the fare, dragged my suitcase through the gates, forcing myself to breathe steadily against the rising panic. The hospital lobby was packed, voices, footsteps, and loudspeaker calls blending into chaos. I went straight to the reception desk, where a young nurse flipped through files. "I'm looking for David Miller." My voice was hoarse, each word heavy. She glanced up briefly, then quickly scanned the records. "He's in intensive care. 5th floor, room 512. She spoke flatly, as if reciting routine information. I didn't bother to thank her. I rushed into the elevator. "Please hold the door," I called as it was closing. The middle-aged man held it open for me. The stench of disinfectant was so strong it made me nauseous. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the ICU corridor was cold and still, broken only by the steady beeping of machines. My old military boots struck the tile with dry, hollow sounds. The door to room 512 was ajar, white light spilling through. I hesitated for a second, then pushed it open, terrified of shattering something fragile. David lay there, on a white bed, surrounded by tubes and machines. His eyes shut tight, his face pale, his body so gaunt I almost didn't recognize him. A breathing tube sealed his mouth. Each shallow breath was so faint I held my own just to hear it. My heart twisted painfully. This wasn't David. This wasn't the boy who ran after me on the beach, or the man who hugged me so tightly when I came home. What lay before me was only a shadow, a shell. A doctor stood in the corner, his name tag reading, "Dr. Johnson." He studied the monitor intently, his face impassive. He turned and asked, "Are you the patient's family?" I nodded, my voice breaking. "I'm his mother, Mary Miller." He nodded slightly, gesturing toward David. "He has late-stage stomach cancer. His condition is extremely serious. If it had been detected earlier, things might have been different." His tone was detached, as though describing any case, but each word cut into me like a blade. "Cancer, final stage." I repeated it in trembling disbelief. An hour ago, I thought I would hug my son, hear him tell me about the time we lost. I thought I would see him healthy, smiling. Not like this, trapped in machines. Why? Why didn't anyone tell me? I pleaded. Dr. Johnson shook his head, his eyes softening with pity. "Since he was admitted, no one has visited. We tried to contact family, but no one responded." No one came. His words struck my heart like a hammer. Emily, my daughter-in-law, the one I trusted. Where was she? I remembered. Margaret's words, the social media post, the yacht, the party. Anger rose but was swallowed by grief. I stepped closer to the bed, taking David's cold hand, his skin paper thin, veins showing through. "David, it's Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down. "I'm here, son." Suddenly, his lips moved, his eyelids fluttered open. His cloudy eyes still held a familiar spark. "Mom," he whispered weakly, "I love you." Before I could finish, the heart monitor screamed with a long, piercing tone. I clutched his hand tighter. "David, no, son," I cried, but Dr. Johnson pulled me back, calling for nurses. "Out. Let us work," he ordered. They pushed me into the hallway. Through the glass, I saw nurses rushing, machines blaring, voices urgent. Everything was chaos. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing. "Please don't take him away," I repeated over and over, as if words could hold him here. But minutes later, Dr. Johnson stepped out, removed his gloves, and shook his head. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." His voice was heavy. I felt hollow inside. My legs buckled as I staggered away from the ICU, unable to look at the white sheet covering my son's face. David was gone. At the very moment I came home, I hadn't been able to tell him how much I loved him, hadn't been able to apologize for leaving him alone. I stood in the hallway, the cold white lights glaring down, the emptiness crushing like the world had collapsed. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling as I dialed Emily. Loud music and laughter thundered on the other end, as if she were in the middle of a party. "What is it?" Emily answered flatly, without a trace of concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "David is dead." There was silence for a few seconds, then she replied as casually as if talking about the weather. "Yeah, I'm busy. We'll talk later." The call ended. I stood frozen. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. Emily hadn't asked a thing, hadn't shown the slightest grief. She was partying while my son took his last breath. I turned and walked out of the hospital. The sun blazed brightly outside, but I felt nothing but cold, a coldness that sank deep into my bones. I had lost David, and now I knew I had lost faith in the only person I once called family. Emily, the woman I thought would care for my son, had betrayed us in the cruelest way. I left the gates of St. Mary's Hospital. The noon sun glared into my face, but inside was nothing but frozen emptiness. My legs were heavy, each step threatening to collapse. I don't remember how long I walked, only that I had to reach the administrative office to register David's death. Those two words, death certificate, pounded in my head like a hammer, shattering any last fragile hope. My son, the child I raised and loved with all my heart, was now reduced to a piece of paper, a stamp, a name in hospital records. A young nurse with her hair tied back handed me a clear plastic bag. "These are Mr. Miller's belongings," she said softly, though hurried by her routine. I took the bag with trembling hands, staring through the plastic. Inside were David's watch, the old leather wallet I had given him for his 20th birthday, and a phone with a cracked screen. I opened the wallet, searching for something personal, some trace of his life, but it was empty. Only documents and one old, wrinkled photograph remained. In it, David and I stood on the beach, he just a little boy, smiling brightly, holding a red kite. I pressed the photo to my chest, terrified that letting go would mean losing him entirely. I also requested David's full medical records. It wasn't another doctor. Dr. Johnson himself walked in, holding a thick file. "This is his complete history." He set the stack on the desk. I flipped through each page: admission date, tests, the final diagnosis, late-stage stomach cancer, metastasized. My eyes blurred as I read the words. The doctor lowered his voice. If he had been admitted a few months earlier, he might have lived another year or two. But when he arrived, it was already too late. I nodded, unable to speak, my chest aching. 1 or 2 years. If I had been home, if I had cared for him more, if I hadn't left everything to Emily, maybe David would have had a chance. "Who was listed as primary contact?" I asked hoarsely at the nurse's station. She checked the log and replied, "Emily Parker. We called many times, sent messages, but couldn't reach her." I froze, as if slapped across the face. Emily, the one I sent money to every month, the one I trusted to care for David, never showed up. Not only did she abandon my son, but when the hospital tried to reach her, she didn't answer. I clenched my fists so hard, my nails dug into my skin until it burned. Just then, David's phone buzzed inside the plastic bag. The screen lit up with Emily's name. I stared at it, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to answer, to scream at her, to ask how she could be so cruel, but I didn't. I couldn't bear to hear her cold voice again. I let it ring until the screen went dark. Then I put the bag into my tote and left the administrative office. I went to the morgue where David's body had been taken to prepare for the funeral. The staff handed me documents to sign, authorizing the transfer of his remains to the military funeral home. I held the pen, but my hand shook so badly that my signature came out jagged. "Are you all right?" the man asked, concern in his eyes. I nodded, though deep down I knew I wasn't. How could I be all right when I had just lost my only child? After signing, I stood and left the morgue, every step heavy as stone. Once outside the hospital, I let the tears fall freely. I stood by the curb, the blazing sun burning my shoulders, but all I felt was pain. Pain for David, for the fact that he had endured his final days in. Loneliness, without his mother's hand to hold. I blamed myself for all the years consumed by work, by missions around the world. I thought sending money was enough, that Emily would care for him. But I was wrong. The greatest mistake of my life was entrusting my son to someone like her. Amid grief and guilt, Emily's image came back to me, sharp and merciless. I remembered her shrill voice on the phone, the pounding music, the laughter on the yacht. She had burned through the money I sent to keep David alive, wasting it on luxury while my son fought for his life. She hadn't just abandoned him, she had been indifferent to his death. That cruelty cut into me like a blade, twisting into pain and fury. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to ask how she could treat David that way. But I knew it wasn't the time. I had to stay calm, had to do what was best for my son, even if he was gone. I pulled out my phone and called Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harris, an old comrade who now worked at the Military Financial Management Agency. "Robert, I need to see you today," I said firmly, tears still streaking my face. "Mary? What's going on? Are you all right?" he asked, worried. "I'll explain when I see you. Please set up an urgent meeting." Robert agreed immediately, telling me to come by his office late that afternoon. Hanging up, I felt like I'd found a handhold in the storm. I hailed a cab back to David's house, at Palm Street, number 420. In the car, I gripped my father's pocket watch, the one I had carried for 40 years, the symbol of my promise to always come home. But now I knew I had come home too late. At David's front door, my keys jingled softly as I searched for the right one. My fingers touched the cold metal key I had held all these years as my tether to him. I opened the door, and the stench of mildew and staleness hit me, as if the house had been abandoned for ages. I flipped the switch. Dim yellow light revealed a living room. Wine glasses with dried residue sat on the table. Dust coated the furniture. Fast food cartons were piled on the floor. I froze, looking around. This had once been David's home, the place I believed he lived happily with Emily. Now it was nothing but wreckage, just like my heart at that moment. I rolled my suitcase next to the old sofa and walked to the desk in the corner. A brown envelope lay buried under papers. I opened it, my heart pounding as I pulled out bill after bill. One read, "Yacht rental, Miami, $150,000, paid with David Miller's credit card." The date was last week, when David was lying in the ICU. I turned to the next and my blood boiled. "Cartier jewelry, $195,000, paid 3 days ago." I gripped the paper so tight my nails dug into my skin. Emily had used David's money. The money I sent to care for him, she spent it on yachts and jewelry while he was fighting for his life. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos of each bill, every number, every date, carefully saving them into a separate folder. Each click was a stab to my heart, but I couldn't stop. I needed proof, needed the truth to confront Emily. I opened the video call app and dialed her number. The screen lit up, showing Emily on the deck of a yacht, the ocean behind her, her friends laughing loudly. She wore a silk dress with a giant Chanel logo, expensive sunglasses, a cocktail in hand. The image was a slap in the face. "What is it?" Emily asked, her tone distracted, as if I were inconveniencing her. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as steady as I could, though fire raged inside me. "You know David is dead, and yet here you are, acting as if nothing happened." Her face faltered for a moment, lips tightening, then she shrugged. "I know, but he'd been sick for a long time. It was only a matter of time." She spoke lightly, as if it didn't matter, not about her husband's death. "About my son." My blood boiled, my body burning. "You think I don't know where the money went? The money I sent to care for David?" I asked coldly. "Yachts, jewelry, parties. I've seen the bills, Emily." She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "That money is mine too. We're family, aren't we?" Family. She dared to use that word after letting David die alone in a hospital. I stared straight into the screen, my voice hard as steel. "This will be the last party you ever pay for with my money." I ended the call, not giving Emily another word. My hands trembled not with fear, but with rage. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let her cruelty go unanswered. I redialed Robert Harris, the old comrade now working in military finance. "Robert, I need your help," I said the moment he answered. "Mary, are you okay? What's happening?" His voice was concerned. I didn't have time to explain. "I'm coming to your office now. Please have the paperwork ready." An hour later, I was sitting in Robert's small office, which smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. I placed a stack of bills on the desk along with the financial authorization David had signed for me before my last mission. Emily spent all of David's money, the money I sent to care for him, on these. I pushed the papers toward Robert. He flipped through them, frowning. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Freeze David's accounts immediately. Cancel all linked credit cards and transfer the remaining balance into my account." Robert nodded without hesitation. He knew me, knew how I acted when lines had been crossed. In 20 minutes, he had completed everything. "It's done," he said, handing me confirmation. "The accounts are frozen. The cards canceled. The balance is now in your name." I nodded, feeling a weight lift, though the pain still stabbed deep. As I left his office, my phone buzzed non-stop. Emily called over and over. I didn't answer, but messages and voicemails flooded in. First, her voice was furious. "What the hell did you do with the accounts? You think you can ruin my life?" Then her tone softened, pleading, "Mary, can we talk? I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just needed the money to get by. Please, reopen the accounts." "I'm sorry." I listened to every word, but felt no sympathy. Emily hadn't apologized for abandoning David, hadn't mentioned my son at all. She only thought of herself. I clutched my father's pocket watch, its cold metal reminding me to stand firm. I stepped into the Florida sun, still blazing bright, but inside me was a raging storm. I headed back to David's house, determined to find more proof. David's image lingered in my mind, his cold hand, his faint voice in the hospital. "Mom, I love you." I couldn't let his death be meaningless. Emily had to pay, not just for the money, but for the cruelty that stole David's final days. He might have lived longer, long enough for me to hold him again, to hear his voice stronger. Not for me to return from service only to receive his body, when my heart was still so full of hope. I pushed open David's front door, now just a hollow shell of what had once been a home. I placed the plastic bag of his belongings on the dining table. The yellow light glowed over his watch and old leather wallet, a harsh reminder of the truth. David was gone. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and opened my old military laptop that had followed me through years of service. The screen lit up, its cold blue glow on my face. I took a deep breath, forcing myself past the screaming grief. This was not the time to collapse. I had to act, had to protect what was left of my son. I logged into the military bank account using the emergency access David had signed over to me before my last mission. The screen showed the freeze confirmation Robert Harris had issued. I checked every detail, making sure there were no gaps for Emily to reach. David's money. I also activated alerts so that any withdrawal attempt would immediately ping my phone. When it was done, I felt a sliver of relief, as if I had built a steel wall between Emily and David's assets. I opened the transaction history for the past 3 months. The numbers glared back cold and unforgiving, like an indictment. $80,000 for a yacht party in Miami, $45,000 for a dinner at a luxury restaurant in New York, $120,000 at a fashion store in Los Angeles. I turned each page, each number stabbing deeper into my chest. That money was my sweat, my blood, my tears, the years I risked my life on the battlefield, believing I was buying peace for David. But in truth, I had only fed Emily's vanity, while my son lay alone in a hospital with no one by his side. I photographed each transaction, saving them carefully on an external drive and the small USB I always carried. Each save was a vow I would not let Emily escape. She would pay for every dollar wasted, for every day she abandoned David. But just as I stored the last file, my phone buzzed again. The screen showed a call from a commercial bank. A polite female voice said, "Mrs. Miller, we received a request to withdraw funds from a joint loan under Emily Parker and David Miller. Do you confirm?" I gripped the phone and answered firmly, "No, I do not confirm. Lock the credit file immediately." The representative hesitated, then replied, "Understood. We will take care of it right away. Do you have any further instructions?" "No," I said, and hung up. I sat in silence, listening to the ceiling fan creak. I dialed Luis, an old friend from the telecommunications field who had once helped me track devices during covert missions. "Luis, I need you to check a number. Emily Parker's. I want to know where she is." My voice was calm but urgent. Luis agreed without hesitation. 10 minutes later, he called back. "The signal is offshore, near Miami. Looks like she's on a boat. Want me to send the coordinates?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Send them." "Thank you." By then, the sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow through the windows. I locked David's house, grabbed the keys to his old pickup. The truck I used to tease him was too old for a young man, and drove to the nearest store. I bought water, canned goods, and 3 new locks, the strongest I could find. Back at the house, I replaced every lock on the front and back doors, each twist of the screwdriver sealing Emily out. I taped over the locks with military-grade seals, coded for tamper checks. It was a habit from my Marine days, to be sure no one had meddled. I gathered David's loose papers into a cardboard box. Inside, I found an old, leather-bound notebook, its strap barely holding. I opened it, my chest tightening at the sight of David's handwriting. Inside was a list of money he had given Emily, with dates and signatures. $30,000, March, for Emily to buy medicine. $50,000, April. Emily said she needed to fix the house. I turned page after page and realized many of these lined up exactly with the luxury expenses on the bank statements. Emily hadn't only spent my money, she had tricked David, making him believe it was all for their family. I dropped into the chair, the notebook in my hand, feeling as if I had found the final piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just evidence, it was David's own account, a story of betrayal he never had the chance to finish telling. I ran my hand over the page, tears spilling down my face. "David, I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never knew what you had to endure." But in the midst of that pain, a new resolve burned inside me. This notebook was the key evidence that would force Emily to face what she had done. I stood, placed it in the box with the other documents, then looked around the house. Everything still bore. David's mark, the chair where he loved to read, the small photo of mother and son on the shelf, the scent of old wood from the floor he used to polish every weekend. I couldn't let Emily step foot in here, touch anything that belonged to my son. Never again. I tightened my grip on my father's pocket watch, the companion of so many years, and told myself, "This isn't over, David. I will protect you, even if you're no longer here." The next morning I carried the box of documents to a small room at the old naval base, where I was still allowed to use a modest office after retiring. A 4th-floor room with a battered wooden desk, a few steel chairs, and the sea breeze drifting through the window. I set the box down, opened it, and spread the papers across the desk. Bills, bank statements, David's notebook. Each sheet was a fragment of the truth. I knew I had to piece them together carefully to strip Emily bare. I sat, drew a deep breath, and forced down the wave of grief rising inside me. Today wasn't for tears. Today demanded the precision of a Marine lieutenant colonel, not the broken heart of a grieving mother. I began cross-checking each expense, each line of David's notes against the bank statements. Bit by bit, a picture formed merciless, like a verdict. The money David gave Emily for medicine or home repairs matched exactly with her withdrawals. One entry read, $50,000, May, for Emily to cover hospital costs, but the bank statement showed that very day $50,000 spent at a luxury spa in Los Angeles. My grip tightened on the pen, nails pressing into my skin, burning. Emily hadn't just spent the money, she had deceived David, making him believe she was caring for their family while feeding her own extravagance. What struck me hardest were the large transactions right after David was admitted to the hospital. One bill stopped my breath. $100,000 for Emily's friend's birthday party, the note clearly stating, "Yacht party. Includes DJ and open bar." The date matched the very day David was taken into the ICU. I stared at the number, my blood boiling. While my son lay frail, fighting for every breath, Emily was laughing, partying, spending money as if nothing were happening. Pain and rage mingled, choking me, but I held it back. I needed evidence. Everything had to be airtight, undeniable. I pulled the military scanner from the corner and scanned each document: bills, bank statements, David's handwritten notes. I saved 3 copies, one on the base server, one on an external drive, and one on an encrypted cloud service used for classified files. Each press of the save button felt like laying another brick in the wall of justice for David. When I finished, I turned to his phone, still sealed in the hospital bag. The inbox had been wiped clean, but I didn't stop. I opened other messaging apps and, by luck, recovered fragments of a group chat. Emily had sent a picture of a Louis Vuitton bag with the message, "Just bought this with David's money. He won't live much longer anyway." Whatever. I read it over and over, each word like a knife to the heart. Emily hadn't just exploited him, she saw my son's death as an opportunity. I kept searching David's email, using the password he'd always used for shared accounts. By chance, I got into his sent folder. There I found an email booking a yacht, sent from David's account to an event company. The note chilled me. "Use Mary's card. She won't be leaving the base for a long time. If she does come back, she'll have to give notice." I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hands. Emily hadn't only taken money, she had calculated every detail, knowing I was far away, unable to watch. She exploited my absence and David's trust to build a life of luxury on my son's suffering. That afternoon, I carried all the information to Robert Harris's office. "Mary, what did you find?" he asked, serious. I placed the box on his desk, pulling out the files and drives. "This is everything: bills, bank statements, messages, emails." Emily drained David's accounts for her spending, even while he was in the hospital. Robert scanned a few pages, then nodded. "This is enough for financial evidence. Do you want to take it further?" I nodded, my voice hard. "I want her to pay not just for the money, but for what she did to David." He rested a hand on my shoulder, eyes filled with sympathy. "I'll guide you on filing in court, but you'll need a strong lawyer before leaving base." I called Anthony Bennett, the attorney Robert recommended, a specialist in family financial abuse cases. "Mrs. Miller, can we meet tomorrow morning?" Anthony's deep, steady voice carried over the phone. "Bring every piece of evidence." "We'll go through it carefully," I agreed, feeling for the first time that I had an ally in this fight. "Thank you," I whispered, then hung up. Relief washed over me, though the grief still pressed heavy. That night, I returned to David's house, locking the doors tight. The sea wind rattled the windows, carrying the sound of waves. But inside me was only a sharp, cutting silence. I sat in the living room, sealed files spread on the table. Beside them lay my father's pocket watch, the lamp's light glinting off its scratched glass. I touched it softly and whispered, "David, I won't let your death be in vain." In my mind, the next steps were clear. Emily's mistake was thinking I would let it go. I was ready not just for justice, but for love of my son, a love no one, not even she, could take away. At dawn, I walked to downtown Miami, where Anthony Bennett's modest office sat among rows of low-rise buildings. The morning air was fresh, a stark contrast to the weight in my chest, grief for David, hatred for Emily. Hugging the box of files close, I pushed open the door. The office was small, orderly, with the scent of old paper and ink drifting over the wooden desk. Neatly stacked files, a red pen, and a steaming cup of coffee sat on top. Anthony, a man in his 40s, rose to greet me, his handshake firm, his sharp eyes seeming to see straight through my pain. "Mrs. Miller, please sit," he said in a calm, deep voice, motioning to the chair. I set the box on the desk and pulled out 3 neatly organized folders: bank statements, bills, receipts, phone and email data from David. "This is everything I have," I said hoarsely, holding myself together though every mention of my son pierced me. Anthony nodded, opened the first folder, flipping swiftly through. His eyes skimmed the figures, the invoices, Emily's cruel words in the messages. From time to time he stopped, jotting notes in red, murmuring, "Illegal transactions. Clear evidence of neglect." I sat quietly, watching him work, as if placing a piece of my soul in a stranger's hands, hoping he could bring justice for David. He glanced up, pushing his glasses higher. "Do you have a notarized financial power of attorney? Did you bring it?" I nodded and pulled out the original, signed by David and certified at the military legal office before my last mission. Anthony examined it closely, then nodded in approval. "Good. This is the key to controlling the assets." He flipped through the papers again, pausing at the yacht invoice and Emily's Louis Vuitton message. "Mrs. Miller, I've seen many financial abuse cases, but this..." He shook his head, anger flashing in his eyes. "She didn't just spend, she deliberately exploited her husband's illness. This was intentional." After nearly an hour of review, Anthony closed the folder and looked straight at me. "This case is strong enough for court. We'll petition for an emergency asset freeze and temporary control of David's estate. With what you've brought, I believe the judge will side with us." I nodded, a faint light breaking through the darkness. "She's on a yacht off Miami," I said softly but firmly. "I have her location from a friend." Anthony's smile was cold, his gaze sharp. "She won't expect us to move this quickly. Emily thinks she can hide at sea forever, but the law doesn't wait." Leaving his office, I felt a slight lift, though the sorrow clung tight. I stopped by the courthouse, its air heavy with paper and the constant hum of printers. I filed a petition for an asset freeze, attaching the documents Anthony had reviewed. A weary-eyed clerk accepted the papers, confirming, "The hearing will take place within 72 hours. We'll notify you." I nodded, thanked her, and stepped outside. The Miami sun blazed, but I only felt cold. Everything I did was for David, but each step reminded me that he was gone. That afternoon, I went to the military funeral home to finalize David's burial arrangements. The uniform I had ordered was ready, a deep navy set, just like the one I had once worn in my youth. The funeral director, an elderly veteran, placed a hand on my shoulder. "He'll be laid to rest with full honors, Lieutenant Colonel Mary," he said in a somber voice. I nodded, unable to speak, my eyes fixed on the neatly folded uniform on the table, the small metal gleaming under the light. I pictured David in that uniform, but the image only tore at my heart. My son should have been alive, smiling beside me. When I returned to David's house, night had already fallen. I opened the door and found a white envelope slipped through the slot, lying on the floor. I picked it up, unfolded the paper inside. It was a handwritten note from Emily. "Mary, we can work this out between us. I need money to pay my debts. Please, don't let this go too far." I read it again. Every word was a slap, not a single apology. No mention of David, no grief. Only money. as if my son's death were just a minor inconvenience in her lavish life. I folded the letter, added it to the evidence file, and gave no reply. Emily didn't deserve a single word from me. On the morning of the hearing, I stood before the mirror in David's house, wearing the dark navy dress uniform I hadn't touched in years. The medals on my chest glinted under the light, each one carrying a story of service. But today, I wasn't wearing them for honor. I wore them to face Emily, to demand justice for my son. I smoothed my hair, gripped my father's pocket watch, and stepped out. The sea wind carried its salty bite, but within me was only cold resolve. The courtroom was vast, the neon lights glaring cold and harsh. The scent of old, damp wood from the benches filled the air, as if time itself had stopped there. I walked in, clutching the files to my chest. Anthony Bennett walked beside me, sharp-eyed but calm. Emily was already seated, wearing a tight Gucci dress, hair perfectly curled, an iPhone in her hand. Her makeup was heavy, eyeliner sharp, but I saw through the facade when she kept her head bowed, feigning exhaustion. Everyone in the room knew she was performing, yet she still tried to play the victim. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 50s, sat high above, calling for both sides to present. Anthony rose, placing the thick folder on the table, each section arranged like a perfect indictment. Your Honor, we present clear evidence that Mrs. Emily Parker committed financial abuse and neglected her duties as a wife to Mr. David Miller. His voice rang firm and steady. On the screen, he displayed bank statements showing lavish expenses, yachts, luxury restaurants, costly jewelry. Then the duplicate receipts proving Emily had withdrawn funds even after David had handed her cash. Finally, he projected social media posts, Emily smiling on a yacht, raising a cocktail glass, while David lay in the ICU just miles away. I sat still, staring at each image, every photo cutting into me like a knife. I remembered David's frail voice, "Mom, I love you." Then the piercing flatline from the heart monitor. Emily hadn't just taken the money, she had stolen the final days of my son's life. Days he could have had, if only he had been properly cared for. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my skin, holding back tears in the courtroom. Emily's lawyer, a slick young man in a shiny suit, stood and said smoothly, "Your Honor, these expenses were the legal right of Mrs. Parker as Mr. Miller's wife. Furthermore, Mr. Miller's condition was incurable. My client cannot be held responsible." His words rolled easily, but I saw Emily avoid my eyes as he spoke. She knew the truth, and I knew she couldn't deny it forever. Anthony called for a witness. Dr. Johnson, the physician who had treated David, entered the courtroom. His voice was deep but steady as he testified. If Mr. Miller had been admitted earlier and received proper care, he could have lived another year or two, but no one ever contacted us. During the 2 weeks he was in the ICU, no one came to visit. The room fell silent. I saw Emily lower her head, gripping her iPhone as if to shield herself from humiliation. The judge turned to me, signaling for me to speak. I rose, the weight of my uniform pressing on my shoulders but giving me strength. I looked straight at Emily, then to the judge, my voice trembling yet firm. I was absent because I was serving my country. I sent money with the trust that my son would be cared for. But no one has the right to exploit my absence to let my son die. When the presentations ended, the courtroom was still. Only the faint sound of breathing and the scratch of the clerk's pen could be heard. Emily bowed her head lower, but I saw no remorse in her eyes. The judge nodded, reviewed the files once more, then declared, "The court hereby orders the freezing of all assets belonging to Mr. David Miller. Temporary control of the estate will be granted to Mrs. Mary Miller. Mrs. Emily Parker is forbidden from accessing the assets or Mr. Miller's residence until further notice. The gavel struck hard, final, like a punctuation mark ending the hell Emily had created. Emily leapt to her feet, face flushed, shrieking, "Mary, you'll regret this. You can't do this to me." Her shrill voice echoed across the room, but the bailiffs moved in quickly, escorting her out. I watched her Gucci dress sweep past the doorway. For the first time, I felt a measure of justice had been served. But it didn't erase the pain. David would never return, and Emily's cruelty would remain a scar etched deep in my heart. I gathered the files, carefully placing them into my case, and stepped outside. The Miami noon sun blazed, reflecting off my medals, making them glint. But I felt no pride, no triumph. Only a quiet, solemn relief, as if what I had done kept my promise to David, even though he was no longer here to see it. When the trial ended, I knew I couldn't rest or let grief consume me. David was gone, but I had to ensure his legacy lived on, that his suffering would not be meaningless. I drove straight to the bank, carrying the court order. After the process was completed, a middle-aged bank officer with kind eyes looked at me and asked, "Mrs. Miller, the assets have been fully transferred into your name. How would you like to manage them?" I took a deep breath and answered firmly, "I want it divided. One part into my personal account, the rest to establish a foundation." I named it the David Foundation, a nonprofit registered with the Department of Social Development that same week. The idea had come to me back in the morgue, as I looked at the military dress uniform prepared for David's funeral. I wanted my son's name to become a symbol of hope for those fighting the illness he couldn't overcome. I reached out to Jackson Memorial Hospital and other medical centers, asking for a list of cancer patients abandoned or unable to afford treatment. A doctor who had cared for David clasped my hand and said, "You're doing something priceless, Mrs. Miller. I'll help in every way I can." Within the first week, the David Foundation covered medication for 12 patients. I also signed a long-term contract with a mobile clinic to bring healthcare services to remote parts of Florida, places where many, like David, were forgotten. One morning, I drove to Palm Beach County Hospital, a few hours from Miami, to see the list of patients supported by the foundation. The air inside was heavy, the smell of antiseptic, and the sound of machines pulling me back to David's final days. In the oncology ward, I saw a boy curled up on his bed, clutching a worn stuffed animal, his wide eyes staring out the window. He looked about 8, thin and pale from chemotherapy. The doctor introduced him. "This is Daniel. He lost his parents in a car accident. He has leukemia and lives here alone." I walked over, sat beside him, and smiled gently. "Hello, Daniel. I'm Mary. What are you doing?" The boy looked up and whispered, "I don't want to die. I just want a family." His words cut through me like a blade. Those bright yet sorrowful eyes mirrored David's when he was a child, when he used to hug me and ask when I'd come home. I held his small, cold hand and said softly, "You're not alone. I'm here with you." The doctor explained that Daniel had a chance at recovery if given consistent treatment and proper care. Without hesitation, I decided the David Foundation would cover all his medical expenses and hired a private nurse just for him. A few weeks later, I returned to Palm Beach Hospital with a bag of fresh oranges and a children's storybook. Daniel was already doing better, his hair nearly gone from chemotherapy, but his eyes sparkled, and for the first time, I saw him smile. That innocent smile warmed my soul. I sat beside him, telling stories of rowing across the Florida Keys, of giant waves and fiery sunsets. Daniel listened intently, stroking his stuffed toy. "Mrs. Miller, were you ever scared out on the ocean?" he asked. I smiled, ruffling his head. "Of course I was. But I learned that no matter how rough the waves, if you hold the oar tightly, you'll always reach the shore." Each visit, I brought something he liked: flan, mango juice, or chocolate cookies. I sat beside him, spooning food to his lips, wiping his mouth when it spilled. Those moments made me feel as if I were caring for David once again, making up for what I had missed before. Daniel slowly opened up, sharing his dream of becoming an astronaut, of traveling to Mars. "I want to see the whole world from up high," he said, his eyes glowing. I nodded, hiding my tears, and smiled. "You will, Daniel. I believe in you." One afternoon, as I was about to leave, Daniel gripped my hand, his gaze timid. "Mrs. Miller, could you be my grandma?" The question froze me, as if time itself had stopped. I looked into his clear, innocent eyes and saw David's reflection, and for a moment, I felt my heart begin to heal. I hugged him tightly, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Of course, Daniel, I will be your grandma." Daniel clung to me, his stuffed toy pressed between us, his frail warmth seeping into me. That very day, I began the legal adoption process. I contacted social services, prepared the documents, and arranged a small room in David's house just for Daniel. I painted the walls navy blue, his favorite color, because it reminded him of the sky. I bought him a twin bed, a small desk, and placed his stuffed animal on the pillow. Each step was a promise to myself. I would never let Daniel be alone, the way I had unknowingly left David. The David Foundation was no longer just my son's legacy. It had become the bridge that led me to Daniel, the child who brought light into my darkest days. 6 months after the trial, I received a call from the doctor at Palm Beach Hospital. "Mrs. Miller, I have good news." His voice rang with excitement. "Daniel has responded well to treatment. The latest results show no trace of cancer cells." I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping the phone as tears streamed down my face. Daniel, the child I had first met in that cold hospital room, now had a chance at life. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'll be there right away." I quickly packed, bringing a small gift, a blue knitted hat I had made just for Daniel. On the day Daniel was discharged, I drove David's old pickup to Palm Beach. He stood at the doorway, frail but with shining eyes, clutching his stuffed animal. The moment he saw me, he ran forward, his smile bright as the Sunday grandma. He shouted, leaping into my arms. I held him tight, feeling his small body's warmth, and in that instant, I saw David's shadow in him. "Let's go home, sweetheart," I said, stroking his hair. "We're going home." We climbed into the truck. The sound of waves from the Atlantic drifted in from afar, the salty air rushing through the windows. David's house had now become a home for the two of us. That first dinner was simple but warm. I made mac and cheese, Daniel's favorite, creamy with melted cheese and a crispy breadcrumb topping. Daniel carefully placed his stuffed animal beside David's photo on the shelf. Then he looked at me shyly and asked, "Do you think Uncle David would love me?" I smiled, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Of course, Daniel. He would be so proud of you." The boy nodded, his eyes glistening, then turned back to his plate, taking a big bite and laughing when cheese smeared across his chin. I wiped his mouth, soaking in that small but genuine joy, as if I were reliving the days with David all over again. In the weeks that followed, I began reshaping the house into a true home for me and Daniel. I painted the living room a soft beige, a warm shade that brought freshness. On the porch, I planted bright red Florida wildflowers that swayed in the sea breeze. In the backyard, I hung a new hammock where Daniel loved to lie reading or watching the sunset. David's belongings, books, clothes, a few photos I stored carefully in a wooden chest. Not to forget, but to preserve the memories. Each time I opened it, I touched his favorite jacket and whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" Meanwhile, I continued running the David Foundation, expanding its reach to the Appalachian Mountains and Latino communities in Texas. The foundation had helped dozens of cancer patients receive early treatment people I knew might have shared David's fate if not for that support. Daniel often sat beside me at the table, doing homework or drawing pictures. Once, he sketched me in uniform, standing next to him with the deep blue Atlantic behind us. "This is you and me, Grandma," Daniel said proudly, handing me the drawing, his eyes glowing with joy. I hugged him, feeling my heart slowly healing. Once a month, I took Daniel with me to join the David Foundation's volunteer group, bringing gifts and food to distant communities. Daniel fit right in, running and laughing with the other children, handing out treats with a bright smile. "Grandma Mary, can I bring more candy next time?" he asked, clutching the empty snack pack he had just given away. "Yes, but you have to ask me first," I replied, winking. He laughed and dashed off to play. I felt a part of David living again, as if he were watching us and smiling from somewhere beyond. I also joined a seniors kayaking club at the Miami harbor. Every morning I paddled over gentle waves, the cool water splashing against my hands, reminding me of my training days at sea. But now I paddled not for duty, but for the peace I thought I had lost forever. Sometimes Daniel sat on the shore, waving and yelling, "Grandma, paddle faster! A fish is chasing you!" I laughed out loud, feeling lighter with each passing day. Every afternoon, Daniel and I tended our small backyard garden. He planted tomatoes, I planted herbs. Our first harvest filled an entire basket. That evening, Daniel helped me cook spaghetti with fresh tomato sauce. "This is better than mac and cheese, Grandma," he exclaimed, sauce smeared across his mouth. I smiled, ruffling his hair, savoring a simple happiness I once believed was gone forever. Sometimes Anthony, the lawyer called to report Emily, was still trying to file lawsuits or claim assets. "She just filed another motion, but the court rejected it," Anthony said calmly. "Don't worry, everything is under control." I only nodded over the phone, never responding to Emily's messages. She was no longer part of my life. One morning, Daniel came running home from school, clutching a certificate for outstanding student, his smile bright as the Sunday. "Grandma Mary, I got the highest score in my class," he shouted, bouncing around the yard. I sat in my familiar wooden chair, holding my father's pocket watch, the light glinting off its worn glass. "Well done, Daniel," I said, hugging him as his laughter blended with the sound of waves. I knew David was still here, in every heartbeat of this new life I was protecting. That same day, I hung another photo on the wall, right beside the one of me and David. The new photo was of me and Daniel, standing by the Atlantic where David once played as a boy. Next to it, I pinned a small note, "David is always with us." I stepped back, looking at the two photos, and for the first time in years, I truly felt at home. Not just in a house of brick and wood, but in a home filled with love and hope, a place Daniel and I were building together, and where David would forever live in our hearts. There are losses that force us to stand and reevaluate our lives. I lost David, but I found Daniel a new reason to love, to keep living, and to give. I realized family isn't only about blood, it's about choice, about deciding who will walk with us through the brightest days and the fiercest storms. Watching Daniel smile, I understood one simple truth. Love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. We cannot change the past, but we can choose to turn pain into hope, so no one has to walk alone. If you were in this situation, would you choose forgiveness, or would you fight for justice to the very end? Do you believe love can heal the void that loss leaves behind? I'd love to hear your answer. And if this story touched your heart, stay with me for the next ones. Let's continue learning how to love and to grow stronger together.